Two little boys stood on the sidewalk outside a luxury dealership holding a toy car in their hands. It wasn't a game. They were trying to sell it to strangers in suits, pleading for just enough money to help their mother. Most people walked past. One man didn't. He stopped, stared, and asked just one question. "Where's your mom now?" The boys pointed down the street. And what happened next? No one saw coming. If you've ever believed that love can come from the most unexpected corners, stay close, like, subscribe, or share your thoughts. Your presence here truly matters. It was a morning like any other in Boston, gray and sharp with winter air. Grant Whitmore stepped out of the brick building on Beacon Street, the final pleasantries from a donor breakfast fading behind him. The kind of event where people talked about compassion over espresso shots and left in tinted cars with assistants trailing behind. Grant didn't linger. He had stopped lingering 5 years ago. As he walked through the frozen paths of Boston Common, he noticed two figures near the bench under the willow tree. Two boys, maybe 7, identical right down to their wool caps and the way their boots didn't quite fit. A folding card table stood in front of them, wobbly, too light for the weight of winter wind. On top sat a single red toy truck, nothing else. He was about to pass when one of them, the slightly taller one, spoke up. "Sir, we're selling this to help our mom." Grant kept walking. He had no time for street tricks. The other boy's voice came softer but cut sharper. "She can't breathe right sometimes. Her kidneys are sick." He slowed. Something in that tone, the flat, practiced way of saying something no child should have to repeat, stuck. He turned back. The toy truck was old, plastic chipped near the wheels, but it had been cleaned carefully. The taller twin looked up at him with eyes too steady for his age. The smaller one stayed quiet, his hands clutching the sleeves of his coat. "What's her name?" Grant asked. "Elena," the taller boy replied. "Elena Brooks." Grant reached into his wallet. He pulled out all the cash he had, $62, and handed it over without asking for change. The boys looked stunned. The smaller one clutched the money to his chest like it might fly away. "What's your name?" Grant asked, his voice softer now. "Mason," the taller boy said. "This is Noah." He nodded once and turned to walk. He should have kept going. He should have disappeared down Charles Street and never looked back. But instead, he paused near a group of tourists feeding pigeons. From there, he watched the boys pack up their table and walk, one holding the other's hand, dragging the empty backpack behind them. They didn't run, they didn't play, they just walked. He followed from a distance, across Tremont, past the 7-Eleven, into the old parts of Dorchester where street lamps blinked too early and windows wore more plastic than glass. The building they entered was faded red brick. 3rd floor, no elevator. One of them paused to help the other with a stubborn stare. Grant stood across the street, his coat open now to the wind, watching the window that flicked to life in pale yellow light. Something about the curve of the younger boy's jaw when he turned back to shut the curtain lingered in his mind. His own son, Daniel, had that same hesitant profile, like he wasn't sure if the world wanted him to look up. He didn't move, not yet, not. He watched as shadows danced behind the curtain, then disappeared into the silence of the room. She didn't look back, but he knew something had changed. The sirens hadn't even faded when Grant found himself alone again. He stood outside the brick apartment on Dorchester Avenue, hands cold in his coat pockets, heart unsure of what it had just committed to. The ambulance carrying Elena Brooks had turned the corner, and her 2 sons were now standing beside him, one gripping the other's wrist like it was the only way to stay upright. He didn't think when he opened the back door of his Audi and motioned them in. They hesitated. Noah looked at Mason. Mason looked at him. But they climbed in. They didn't ask where he was taking them, and he didn't offer an explanation. The drive to Cambridge was silent. Snow drifted across the Charles River as the car crossed Longfellow Bridge. Grant glanced in the rearview mirror once. Noah had his head on Mason's shoulder, both of them half asleep, shoes dusty, cheeks blotched with wind. Grant had seen hundreds of pitch decks, Hundreds of men asking for investments, but none had ever looked so quietly desperate. The mansion sat on a quiet street lined with elm trees. Lights were timed to switch on at sunset, and the front steps had been salted earlier that morning by a landscaping crew Grant had never met. The house felt too large as they entered, every footstep echoing more than it should. Mrs. Jensen, his longtime housekeeper, peeked out from the kitchen. He gestured lightly. 2 guests. Temporary. That was all he said. In the dining room. Grant watched the boys eat peanut butter sandwiches like it was the first real food in days. Noah tried to peel off the crusts carefully, but his fingers trembled. Mason ate quickly, eyes darting toward the hallway like he expected someone to tell them they didn't belong. Grant poured them each a glass of milk and set it down without a word. Later, upstairs. The guest room was too cold, so Grant opened the bedroom next to his own, a room with blue walls and a mobile still hanging from the ceiling. He hadn't entered it in years, not since Daniel, but he changed the sheets while they were brushing their teeth and folded the old comforter with a worn rocket ship pattern across the end of the bed. He was about to leave them when Mason asked, "Is this your son's room?" Grant hesitated. It was. Noah stood by the window, fingers touching the curtain. "Can we stay here just tonight? You can stay as long as your mom's in the hospital." Noah nodded. He didn't say thank you. He didn't have to. Downstairs. Grant poured himself a drink he didn't want and sat by the fireplace he never lit. His phone buzzed a text from the hospital. Elena was stable. Grant stared at the flames as they flickered, unlit. Hours passed. Somewhere in the silence above, floorboards creaked. Grant got up, made his way to the kitchen, opened a drawer looking for a charger. Instead, he found something he hadn't seen in years, a photo in a cracked silver frame. Daniel in his paper astronaut suit, cheeks smudged with chocolate, looking straight into the camera with a half smile and eyes too wise for 6. He placed the photo face down, slowly, like closing the lid of a memory. Just then, Noah's voice called from the hallway upstairs. "Mr. Grant, there's a picture that fell from your drawer." Grant didn't answer right away. He looked up the stairs, saw Noah's shadow holding something carefully in both hands. He said nothing, just stood there, watching the boy cradle a piece of the past he wasn't supposed to find. The photo stayed in Grant's hand longer than he meant for it to. He had found it again the night before, tucked behind a stack of old mail and warranty receipts in the kitchen drawer, where so many things ended up when there was no one else to sort through them. Daniel had been 6 when it was taken, cheeks smudged, arms outstretched in a homemade astronaut costume built from cardboard and tape. Grant stared at the photo now in the silence of his study. The same toy truck drawn in crayon gripped proudly in the boy's hand. That toy truck. The one Mason and Noah had tried to sell. Coincidence? Maybe, but it scratched at something deeper, something that hadn't bled in years. Across the city, Elena Brooks blinked awake to the hum of monitors and a soft beep near her head. The hospital light made the room look sterile, even though the nurse had placed a small plastic plant on the windowsill. Elena tried to sit up, but the weight of fatigue pinned her down. She saw the IV in her arm, the oxygen monitor clipped to her finger, and then remembered Mason and Noah. She pressed the call button. When the nurse came in, she didn't ask how she was feeling. She asked where her kids were. "They're safe," the nurse said. "A Mr. Grant Whitmore brought them. Said he's a family friend." Elena's brow furrowed. She didn't have family friends. She had neighbors who looked the other way when she left for work before dawn. An hour later, Grant arrived with the boys in tow. They walked in shyly, holding a bag of dried cereal and a drawing something with 3 stick figures and a big red heart in the center. Elena tried not to cry. Instead, she straightened her shoulders and looked directly at the man who had brought them. "I'm sorry," she said. For what Grant asked, genuinely confused. For the trouble. "I don't know what they said to you in the park." Grant shook his head. "You're not trouble. They didn't say anything wrong." A quiet fell between them. Noah slid the drawing onto her lap and leaned in. He gave us sandwiches and hot cocoa. Elena met Grant's eyes again, still guarded but less sharp. Why did you bring them? I don't usually do things like this, he said. Elena gave a dry smile. Me neither. They laughed, and for the first time, it didn't feel like a transaction. Just two people caught in the strange moment of recognizing someone they hadn't expected to see. Later, as the nurse checked her vitals and the boys colored in silence, Elena mentioned something without quite meaning to. I was studying law, years ago, before everything. Grant looked at her. What stopped you? My dad died. My mom lost the house. Then I got pregnant. She said it plainly, not with shame, just a dull resignation worn like a second skin. Grant didn't press. He just nodded, then glanced at the boys. On the way out, back in his car, he opened his phone and scrolled through contacts he hadn't touched in months. Dr. Henderson, a nephrologist at Massachusetts General. He didn't explain much, just said there was someone who needed evaluation, someone who mattered, not for himself, but for two boys who had shared a sandwich and a story. Back home, as Grant stood outside the guest room, he listened to Mason humming softly, the kind of tune kids make up when they feel safe. He turned off the hallway light, but left the door cracked open. She didn't look back, but he knew something had changed. Grant sat in his office, lights dimmed low, the snow outside his Cambridge home blurring the windows with soft streaks of white. The monitor in front of him showed the personnel archive from nearly a decade ago. Names, positions, resignation memos, HR notes filed in impersonal language. He scrolled slowly, methodically, until he found it. Paul Brooks. Terminated in late 2015. Technical misconduct. No lawsuit filed. Internal settlement approved by the board. He remembered the meeting now. He'd barely glanced at the file his father had passed across the conference table. Handled, Robert Whitmore had said, in that final tone that didn't allow space for disagreement. Paul Brooks had walked out quietly. No public scandal. Just disappeared. And now, years later, in a hospital bed not 10 blocks from Greystone's main campus, lay Elena Brooks. Paul's daughter. No mention of her connection. No demand for reparation. Just a name on a chart. A mother trying to stay alive for her kids. Grant leaned back in the chair. His fingers hovered over the edge of the file on screen. The words swimming with history. He clicked print, then stood. Later that evening, the house was unusually still. Noah and Mason had gone to bed early, curled under the rocket ship blanket in the blue room. Grant found himself wandering the kitchen out of habit, not hunger. He filled a glass with water, set it on the counter, and was about to head upstairs when he heard a soft thump. The refrigerator door was open. Mason, half asleep and shivering in socks too thin for the marble floor, was trying to pour himself a glass of milk. "You should be in bed," Grant said quietly. Mason jumped, startled, then nodded. "I was thirsty." Grant walked over, took the milk from the boy's shaking hands, and poured it for him. Mason took a small sip, then asked without looking up, "Are you a bad guy?" The question landed hard. "What makes you ask that?" Grant said, keeping his tone neutral. "You don't smile much," Mason said, "and sometimes people who don't smile, they leave." Grant sat on the floor beside him, back against the cabinet, knees bent the way Daniel used to sit when reading upside down. "I don't smile much," he admitted, "but that doesn't mean I don't care." Mason looked at him. "You helped us, but Mom said we shouldn't trust people with too much money. She says money makes people forget how to listen." Grant didn't answer right away. He watched Mason finish his milk in small gulps. The boy rinsed the cup, like he'd been taught, then placed it upside down in the sink rack. Back in his office, Grant sat again in front of the folder. The printed version now lay open on his desk, its contents damning in their bureaucracy. His father's signature stared back at him. The same signature that had built Greystone, the same one that had signed away Paul Brooks's career and, perhaps, Elena's chance at something more. He took the folder in both hands. He could shred it, burn it, pretend it never mattered, but instead, he placed it in the locked drawer of his desk. Not hidden, not forgotten, not yet. He turned off the light, but paused at the doorway, looking back at the drawer. Something about the silence told him the story wasn't done with him yet. It started with spilled milk. A loud clatter, the sound of a plastic cup tumbling across the tile floor of the kitchen, followed by Mason's tiny gasp and Noah's guilty, sorry, I didn't mean to. Then silence, but not the frozen kind. Grant, still in his dress shirt from a morning Zoom call, stepped into the room and took it in. Milk puddled across the floor, a toaster smoking faintly. Two boys standing like statues, braced for impact. He grabbed a towel, no raised voice, no lecture, just hands and fabric and quiet movement. Mason blinked, surprised. "You're not mad?" "No," Grant said, squeezing out the towel in the sink. "It's just milk." Noah's shoulders dropped. A beat later, Mason giggled, more a hiccup of tension than humor. Then Noah joined in. Grant looked at them both, and to his own surprise, laughed too, later. Elena arrived by rideshare, her hospital wristband barely tucked beneath her sleeve. The boys had cleaned the living room themselves. A slightly crooked vase of dandelions sat on the coffee table. Mrs. Jensen had lit a candle that smelled like gingerbread. Elena paused at the door. Grant stood beside her, hand on the frame. "You don't have to stay long," he said, "just until we get more answers." Elena's voice came low. "And what do I owe you for this?" He didn't look at her. Nothing, except maybe a little trust. She walked in without another word. The house held its breath as she moved from room to room, touching the walls like they were memories made tangible. In the kitchen, Mason showed her the towel still hanging on the oven handle. "Mr. Grant helped clean," he whispered. He didn't yell. Later that afternoon, rain painted soft lines across the windows. The four of them stood in the kitchen, scrubbing colorful food dye off the wall from a failed pancake art experiment. Noah kept using too much water. Mason hummed off-key. Elena wiped the wall in slow circles. Without warning, she spoke. "My father died the same week I found out I was pregnant. Brain aneurysm, no signs, no goodbye." Grant didn't interrupt. "I had one semester left," she continued. "I called the bursar's office to ask for deferment. They said my file was frozen. Something about student conduct. I'd been on the dean's list every term." She dipped the sponge into the bucket. "People think you fall apart all at once. You don't. It's paper cuts, quiet things. You don't even feel them until you try to stand back up." Grant handed her a towel. Their hands brushed. She didn't pull back. "I was ready to end it," she added. "But one night, lying in bed, both babies kicked, same moment. I put my hand there, and they kicked again." She didn't cry. She didn't need to. Grant placed a mug of tea near her elbow. Not to fix anything, just to say, "I'm listening." After dinner, while Elena tucked the boys into the blue room, Grant stood in the hallway outside the study. The door had been locked for 5 years. Daniel's room. Not the bedroom, this was different. This had been the quiet place. The room where ideas happened, where crayons left smudges on oak wood and plastic dinosaurs peeked from behind textbooks. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the key. It turned easily. The room smelled of dry paper and memories. One wall bore a single frame drawing, a child's rendering of a family, a boy, a man, a woman, and a toy truck floating in the sky between them. The colors had faded, but the message hadn't. Grant looked at it for a long time. Then he stepped aside as footsteps came down the hallway. Elena stood at the threshold, unsure. He didn't say anything, just moved far enough for her to see the drawing. She didn't look back, but he knew. Something had changed. The library had always been locked, not out of fear, but out of preservation. It was Daniel's. Not in name or form. It had no toys, no bed sheets, no nightlights, but it had been where he drew, asked questions, curled up with picture books about planets and dinosaurs. The door creaked open now because Grant had chosen to leave it ajar, and Mason, curious as ever, pushed it wider one morning and stepped inside. There on the back wall, above a shelf that leaned slightly to the left, hung a drawing done in crayon, faded now. the colors soft and blurred at the edges, but the shapes were still clear three-stick figures, hand in hand, beneath a sky filled with stars and a red toy truck hovering like a planet. "It looks like us," Mason said. Grant stood beside him, silent. He didn't correct him. They spent that morning fixing the leaning shelf together. Mason held the flashlight while Grant adjusted the brackets. "At one point," the boy whispered, "I think Daniel would have liked trucks too." Grant didn't reply, but he tightened the last screw with a care that wasn't just mechanical. In the evenings now, Elena brought her laptop to the room and used the long oak table as a desk. The boys sat beside her, working through spelling lists and math facts. Grant, surprisingly adept in the kitchen, began to cook again pasta with too much garlic, French toast with cinnamon edges, meatloaf from a recipe long buried in his wife's handwriting. After dinner, the four of them found their way to the living room, a fire flickering low, the couch finally looking lived in. Grant suggested a movie, and the boys lit up. Elena hesitated at first, then settled between them, her legs tucked under her like it was her own space. Midway through the film, Noah asked, "Mom, did you go to college?" Elena hesitated, then she smiled, soft and wry. "I did. For a while, I wanted to be a lawyer." Grant glanced at her, something shifting behind his eyes. "Why didn't you finish?" Mason asked. "I had to stop," she said gently. "Life got full, fast." Later that night, when the boys were tucked into bed and the credits rolled, Elena didn't get up right away. She stayed on the couch, head resting against Grant's shoulder. They didn't speak. The moment didn't ask for words. In the quiet that followed, Grant stepped into his study and scrolled through his contacts until he found a number he hadn't dialed in years. Professor Saul Dyer, now chair of legal studies at Boston College. He typed a message, "Need to talk." Potential returning student. Smart. Driven. Circumstances. Complicated. Back in the hallway. He paused outside the blue room. Inside, Mason and Noah whispered beneath the covers, plotting some mission involving the toy truck and space aliens. Their voices, light and hopeful, wrapped the house in something it hadn't held in years. He turned off the hallway light, but left the library door open. She didn't look back, but he knew something had changed. Mrs. Jensen had worked for the Whitmore family since before the walls of the house held their first coat of paint. She had seen the seasons shift through its wide windows, watched Daniel take his first steps across the tile, and felt the echo that followed the silence after the accident. So when she stood in the kitchen that morning, wiping down an already clean counter, and turned to Grant with a quiet, "Are you sure it carried more than housekeeping concern?" Grant didn't answer right away. He looked down at the coffee in his hands, then toward the hallway beyond the living room. The door there had remained shut for 5 years, untouched, unspoken, preserved. Not for others. For him. For the version of himself he hadn't been ready to face. "I'm sure," he said at last. Later that afternoon, Elena walked the corridor after helping Mason find his missing math worksheet. The door, once shut like stone, now stood open. A breeze from the garden had nudged it wider, letting soft light spill across the threshold. She paused, uncertain whether to step closer. But curiosity is a quiet tug. It rarely announces itself. Inside, the air was still, not stale. A boy's room, frozen not by accident, but by choice. Shelves lined with models of planets, a set of building blocks, mid-construction on the corner desk. A small blue jacket hung on the back of the door, still bearing a sticker from a science museum trip. And on the nightstand, a framed photograph of 3 Daniel, his mother, and Grant smiling, captured in a sunbeam that looked like it had never quite left. Elena didn't touch anything, but she stood there, long enough to understand something without it needing to be said. That night, while the boys played a quiet board game in the library, Elena found Grant standing near the window, watching the wind play with the trees in the backyard. He didn't turn when she entered. "You left it all the same," she said. He nodded. "Just once. I used to think moving on meant forgetting," he said. "Turns out, you just find new places to carry it." She stepped forward, her hand resting lightly on his shoulder. Not for comfort, not for sympathy, just presence. You don't have to close the door again, she said. It doesn't have to be either or. You can let the past breathe. They stood like that for a while, not needing to fill the space with explanation. Later that evening, while the boys slept, Elena opened her laptop. An old instinct pulled her toward her university's alumni portal. Her ID had long expired, but she remembered a different way in an email, a former classmate now on staff. She clicked through old records, partially archived. A few search terms later, she found what she hadn't been looking for. In the fall semester of 2015, a donor had funded a scholarship program for underrepresented students in pre-law. Just 1 year, one donation. The name listed was Grant Whitmore. She stared at the screen. She didn't look back. But he knew. Something had changed. The Northeastern Law Library still smelled of old paper and polished wood. Elena stood under its arched ceiling, carrying a silence that had followed her for years. She hadn't meant to come, had told herself it wouldn't change anything, but something about seeing her name next to Grant's on an old scholarship list had stirred a knot she couldn't leave alone. The front desk was manned by a middle-aged man in a tweed vest. His name tag read Caleb, and when she gave her maiden name, Brooks, he tilted his head. "Paul Brooks's daughter," he asked, not unkindly. She hesitated. "Yes." He nodded slowly. "I was here when your transfer request came in. You never replied. I never got a reply." He disappeared into a back room. Minutes passed. When he returned, he held a yellowed envelope, edges soft, stamp curled from age. Her name, handwritten in clean, steady ink. "We found this months later. Returned undelivered." Caleb said, "No forwarding address." Elena opened it with careful fingers. Inside was an official acceptance into the School of Public Policy's legal aid track, full scholarship. The letter had been postmarked 1 week after her father's forced resignation and the shutdown of his department. The funding source listed was the Evelyn Whitmore Foundation. Her chest tightened. Evelyn Grant's mother. She didn't say thank you, just nodded, and left the library clutching the envelope like it was made of breath. That night, the Fairmont Copley Plaza glowed under winter lights. The annual Greystone Gala had returned after 3 years on pause, now roaring back with luxury and whispers. Elena wore a navy dress, borrowed from Mrs. Jensen's niece. It fit snug, but respectfully. Not that it mattered. The stairs were already landing. She kept to the edges, fingering the clasp of her clutch. Waitstaff streamed by with champagne flutes. Her sons were home drawing signs for Team Whitmore. Something Mason had insisted was their new superhero family. They'd given Grant a drawing before he left for the gala, 3 stick figures labeled "Our Team" beneath a triangle of stars. He had tucked it into his inside suit pocket. Across the ballroom, Elena caught pieces of laughter, slick, effortless, floating in the gold-tinged air. She recognized no one, and everyone seemed to know each other. "You're Grant's guest," a woman asked, pausing beside the canapé table. Her pearls glistened like judgment. "Yes," Elena replied evenly. The woman tilted her head. "Oh, how sweet. A little charity case for the brand. Very good PR." Elena froze. Before she could respond, Grant stepped in from nowhere. He'd seen her across the room, noticed her posture shift. He placed a hand gently on her back. "Actually," he said, his voice calm but clear, "Elena has done more for this company and this city than most people in this room." The woman blinked. She raised 2 boys with no help. She worked 2 jobs. She taught them decency, even when the world offered her none. That's not charity. That's strength. He didn't look at the woman again. Just turned to Elena and said quietly, "You okay?" Elena looked at him. Not the suit, not the setting, but the man behind it all. She didn't nod. She didn't need to. They stepped into the crowd together, not arm in arm, but in step. Later, while they stood near the silent auction board, a voice behind them cut through the soft music. Elena Brooks. She turned. A man in a tailored black suit stood there, aged but sharp, glass in hand. "Yes," she replied. "I knew your father." He said, "Paul Brooks. You're his daughter." "Right." She didn't answer right away. She didn't look back. But he knew. Something had changed. The wind that night came sharp through the slats of the porch. Elena sat on the back steps of the Whitmore estate, elbows on her knees, staring into the quiet lawn like it might offer answers she wasn't sure how to form into questions. The hem of her dress trembled slightly in the cold, but she didn't notice. Not yet. Grant stepped out a few minutes later. He had changed into his soft wool cardigan, the one his wife used to say made him look more like a professor than a CEO. He held her coat in one hand. The other stayed at his side. "I thought you might need this," he said gently, not quite sitting beside her, not quite turning away. She didn't take the coat. She didn't even look up. "You're Robert Whitmore's son." It wasn't a question. It wasn't accusation either. It was a simple unlocking. Grant stayed still. The coat dropped slightly in his hand. His voice was quiet. "Yes." "He fired my father," she said, eyes still fixed ahead, without hearing him out, without a single meeting, just a phone call. Then the article started. Then the silence. I was 17. Northeastern sent me a letter revoking my scholarship. They didn't want a scandal attached to their name. He nodded, slowly. I didn't know then. I was 23. I wasn't part of that decision, but you benefited from it. Yes. There was a long pause between them, the kind that fills a house in the hours after a funeral. I've spent years trying to rebuild something. Anything, she continued, voice steadier now. And just when I thought maybe I could find a new way forward, I find myself under the same roof, with the same name that erased everything we had. Grant looked down at the coat, then folded it over his arm. I can't undo what was done. I wish I could. That's not what I need, she said, finally turning to him. I need to know that I'm not reliving the same pattern, that I'm not someone's second charity, that this, she gestured vaguely toward the house, isn't some elaborate apology. It's not, he said, but it can be a beginning. If you want it to be. She shook her head. Not no, but not yes either. Just motion, just ache. I need to know who I am when I'm not standing next to you, she said, almost too soft for the wind to carry. Then she stood up, walked back inside, and closed the door behind her. Grant remained there on the steps. The porch light hummed. The coat grew heavier in his hands. The next morning, the kitchen was too quiet. The boys' cereal bowls sat clean in the sink. The magnets on the fridge were rearranged. Where their drawing had been, a picture of 4 smiling stick figures holding hands, was a folded piece of paper. He opened it. Thank you for what you've done, but I need to finish becoming who I was meant to be. Maybe then, I'll know how to come back. He set it down, took a breath. She didn't look back, but he knew. Something had changed. Grant didn't call her. He didn't try to find her through lawyers or assistants or gifts. That kind of gesture didn't fit this kind of silence. What he did instead was drive to Roxbury, to a quiet street where the paint flaked off porch rails and mailboxes leaned on weak screws. He had the address from old HR records. Elena's mother lived here now, in a 1-story unit at the end of the block. The window blinds were closed, no porch light. He rang the bell once and waited, hands in his coat pockets. After a few minutes, the door opened just a crack. A paper bag slid out, soundless, across the porch. Then the door closed again. He stood there for a second, unsure if he should knock again, but he didn't. He picked up the bag, returned to his car, and sat with it beside him like it was something fragile. Inside, folded with care, were scraps of a life once too stable to question a copy of Elena's tuition bill with void stamped across the top, half-written scholarship applications, a rejection letter with smudged ink, a worn resume with bakery hours penciled along the side, and a photo. 3 people on a sunny day, with a kite half out of frame. Her father was smiling. Her mother's hand was on her shoulder. Elena, maybe 14, was looking straight at the camera like she already knew how the world worked and didn't trust it one bit. Grant brought the bag home, left it on the dining table, then he went upstairs. He didn't go into Noah's room, or his son's, just stood in the hallway for a while, fingers grazing the light switches, trying to remember how it felt to move through this house without a second thought. That night, he started writing. It wasn't a letter. It wasn't even personal. It was a formal statement of accountability. He gathered every document his legal team could access from the Brooks file, every email, every internal memo. He included his own father's signature on the dismissal approval. Then, he attached a cover note. In light of recent questions around historical ethics in our company's personnel practices, I want to clarify one case that was never addressed publicly. The forced resignation of Paul Brooks in 2006 was not based on fact, but fear. The company chose silence. I regret that choice. He sent it to a freelance investigative journalist who'd once interviewed him about tech in education. This time, he asked for no favor, only fairness. The next morning, he had his assistant wire a donation to the Whitmore Fund, his father's old scholarship trust. Then he rewrote the name on the scholarship line. This time, it read, the Elena Brooks Legal Scholarship. He didn't tell anyone. By the following week, the article had gone live. It wasn't front-page news, but it was honest, and people read it. Elena read it, not because he sent it, but because someone left a printed copy at her door, folded open to the paragraph with her father's name. She sat down on the floor beside it, the grocery bag in her hand, slipping to her feet. Later that evening, while brushing Mason's hair in their tiny apartment in Dorchester, she got a message. It was from Mrs. Jensen. Dinner table still has 4 plates. It read, the 2 little chairs haven't moved. Elena stared at the screen. Then she looked up at Mason and Noah, tangled in the blanket on the couch, their heads close, a crayon still tucked behind Noah's ear. Outside, it started to rain, soft and steady. She didn't know what to say, so she didn't say anything. She just pulled the blanket higher over their shoulders. The hospital hallway smelled like alcohol wipes and damp paper gowns. Elena sat still in the waiting room, her fingers pressed tight between her knees. She wasn't nervous, not exactly. But something had shifted since the last visit. There was less air in her chest, less noise in her mind. The nurse called her name. She stood, nodded, followed. They passed a vending machine humming in the corner and the same poster about kidney health she'd seen every time but never read. Inside the examination room, Dr. Henderson greeted her with a small smile, his tone more formal than usual. Elena, he said, I need to tell you something. She held his gaze. We've found a compatible donor, he said. Her breath caught, the kind that didn't show on her face but twisted her stomach into a knot. There was no public registry request, she said quietly. How he handed her a form, the name already printed at the top, Grant Whitmore. Her eyes didn't blink. She didn't speak, just stared at the page like it had written itself in the wrong reality. He was tested a week ago. Dr. Henderson added, he signed the preliminary consent already. No conditions. She folded the paper once, then again, then set it down beside her on the table. Thank you, she said. Her voice wasn't warm, but it wasn't cold either, just quiet. She didn't go looking for him. She didn't send a message. But later that afternoon, while waiting near the elevator bay, she turned and found him standing at the end of the hallway, holding a paper cup of coffee he clearly wasn't drinking. He looked older in that moment, like the white in his beard had deepened in a week. I didn't want to intrude, he said. You're not here because of guilt, she interrupted. That's not what I need to hear. He nodded once. I don't know what I am, Elena. I've spent a long time trying to be a good man by fixing things, but I never asked if people wanted them fixed. She looked at him, not at his mouth or his hands, but his eyes. This isn't about being good, she said. It's about showing up. He shifted his weight slightly. If this gives you time, or a second chance, or whatever the right words are, I'll do it. She didn't thank him. Not in the way people expect when they're told their life might get saved. Instead, she said, "I don't forgive you because you're a good man, Grant. I forgive you because I refuse to teach my sons that bitterness is something we pass down." A silence followed, not uncomfortable, just full. He nodded, not the kind that ends a conversation, but the kind that says, "I hear you." She stepped forward, slow but certain. Her fingers brushed his hand. Then, gently, she took it in hers. "Don't say anything," she whispered. He didn't. She squeezed once. "Just don't disappear." The smell of acrylic paint and old wooden floors wrapped around the main hall of the Boston Arts Hub like a memory. Rows of paintings hung on strings across the space, paper warping just slightly from the drying brushstrokes of small hands. Outside, the November air clung to jackets and cheeks, but inside was warm with the sound of chairs scraping, children's laughter, and the quiet hum of possibility. Elena stood near the entrance, adjusting her dress for the third time. It wasn't fancy, just a dark blue cotton wrap, but it carried a weight of significance tonight. Her boys had chosen it. Mason said it made her look like someone who wins. She wasn't sure what that meant yet. Grant arrived quietly, not with any grand entrance, just holding a tray of plastic cups filled with juice. He greeted the volunteers with small nods and asked where the extra chairs were. He didn't look like a CEO tonight. He looked like someone rebuilding something, plank by plank. Near the center of the room, a single easel stood apart from the rest. It held a drawing framed in cardboard, a red toy car, two smiling boys, a man with gray hair, and a woman placing her hand on her heart. The title in block letters read, "Family." Elena hadn't seen it until that moment. Her breath caught in her throat. Noah and Mason had painted it in the hospital lobby, one afternoon while waiting for Elena's checkup. She remembered Noah whispering, "Do you think he'll know it's him?" Mason had just smiled. As guests gathered, the murmurs quieted. A volunteer tapped the microphone, and then Elena was called to the front. She walked slowly to the makeshift stage. Her steps felt heavier than they should, but her heart was oddly light. She looked at the faces in front of her neighbors, strangers, teachers, two women from the shelter she once stayed in, and the janitor who once let her warm up inside the school cafeteria when her heater broke. "I used to believe," Elena began, "that broken stories couldn't be told out loud." She paused. No one moved. "But then someone told me that the cracks are where the light gets in. So tonight, this isn't a perfect story. It's not one where everything gets tied up neatly, but it's mine. And it's true." She told them about the letters that never arrived, the things taken, and the strength it took to keep waking up, about Mason drawing pictures to distract her from pain, and Noah whispering his dreams through the thin curtains of a hospital room. Then she turned to the drawing behind her. "My sons painted this. They didn't name it for me. They named it for what they believe a family can be, not what we used to be, but what we can choose to become." Her voice faltered just slightly, but she let it. She didn't hide it behind humor or apology. "I want you to know," she continued, "that trust isn't something that shows up when everything's easy. It's what we choose, again and again. When it's hard, when we don't have all the answers." When she stepped down, the applause wasn't loud. It was quiet, like a wave returning to shore, steady, certain. Later, as people mingled and sipped from plastic cups, an older man in the back raised his hand. "Miss Brooks," he asked. "It's true, right? You and Mr. Whitmore are starting a life skills course here next month, and he's leading the first session." The crowd turned, eyes on Grant now. He looked at Elena. She didn't say anything, just waited. Grant nodded. "I don't know if I'm the best teacher," he said, "but I've learned a few things the hard way. And if anyone's willing to listen, I'll show up." A woman clapped first, then another. Soon the room was full of it. Elena didn't look back, but she knew. Something had shifted. The room smelled faintly of glue and construction paper, the kind of scent that stuck to your clothes and reminded you of being 10 again. Grant knelt between two long tables, carefully demonstrating how to fold the wings of a paper airplane so it would glide, not nosedive. Around him, a group of kids buzzed with energy, crumpling sheets, testing launches, arguing over which fold made the best nose. Noah was seated closest to Grant, tongue poking out slightly as he pressed along the crease with the edge of a ruler. Elena stood at the back of the room, her arms crossed gently, a small smile pulling at her lips. She was watching half with amusement, half with something else she didn't quite name. Then it happened. "Dad, look at mine." The voice was Noah's, loud, clear, so certain it startled even him. The room went still. A paper plane in midair spiraled to the floor. Noah froze, eyes wide. He looked at Grant, then at Elena. A tiny panic crept into his face like a shadow. He opened his mouth to take it back, to say Mr. Grant, or just, hey, anything to undo it. But Grant didn't flinch. He didn't laugh. He didn't correct him. He just reached out, gently took the crooked paper airplane from Noah's hand, examined it like it was a treasure. "Let's fly it together," he said softly. And they did. It soared clumsily at first, then caught a small breeze from the cracked window and glided halfway across the room. The kids cheered. A girl clapped. Noah's shoulders relaxed. He looked over at Elena. She hadn't moved, but her lips were pressed together, and her eyes shimmered. That night, after dinner and homework and the inevitable bedtime negotiations, Elena stayed behind. She wandered into the library, not because she was looking for anything, but because she didn't want to leave yet. The room still smelled like old paper and lemon wood polish, a quiet haven tucked into the corner of Grant's home. She stared at the bookcase for a long time before noticing the photo album resting on the edge of the second shelf. She'd seen it before, always looked away. This time, she reached out, pulled it down, sat cross-legged on the rug. The photos were soft around the edges, some printed with the kind of color that faded into warm tones over time. A boy, Grant's son, grinning with cake smeared on his chin. In another, he stood next to Grant, both wearing matching Red Sox caps, the boy's hands holding a fishing rod too big for his frame. Elena traced her fingers along the plastic sleeve covering one of the pages. She didn't cry, but something inside her loosened, like a knot drawn too tight for too long. She closed the album gently and leaned back against the wall, knees pulled up. The silence didn't feel lonely. It felt full. Later, as Grant walked past the doorway, he paused. "You okay?" he asked. She nodded. Then after a beat, she said, "He called you Dad today." "I know," he replied, stepping in. "He didn't mean it." She added quickly, "It just slipped out." Grant didn't respond right away. He sat beside her, not too close, not far either. "Maybe, or maybe he did," he said quietly. "Sometimes the truth slips out first." They sat in the hush of the library, surrounded by stories and pages, and the echoes of what could have been, what still might be. Elena turned toward him, voice low. "If one day, if they really call you that, are you scared?" Grant looked at her. His eyes didn't waver. "I'm scared of something else," he said, "that you won't let me stay." The conference room on the 27th floor of Greystone Holdings had always felt too polished, the kind of room where no one raised their voice, even when they wanted to. Grant sat at the head of the glass table, sleeves rolled, hands folded, facing men and women who once toasted to his acquisitions but now avoided his eyes. One of them, a man in a navy tie with teeth too straight to be natural, cleared his throat and read from a letter. "For the sake of the company's image," he said, "we believe your involvement in public welfare activities, while noble, may appear to be an attempt at personal rebranding." He looked up, adding, "It might be best to take a step back." Another chimed in about media optics. Someone mentioned shareholder concerns. Grant listened. Then he stood up, adjusted his jacket, and left without a word. Outside, the hallway echoed with the soft click of his shoes. He didn't stop at his office. He didn't answer the calls that started buzzing in his pocket. He walked straight to the parking garage and sat in his car for a long time, hands on the wheel, engine off. That night, the Whitmore house was quiet. Mason and Noah were asleep, their coloring books still spread on the dining table. Elena was in the library, organizing books she hadn't touched in weeks. When Grant walked in, she didn't look up. "I heard," she said after a beat. "They want you to quit the project." He nodded. She turned to face him, arms crossed. "What are you doing?" "Grant, they think I'm using people like you to clean up the name Whitmore." Elena's jaw tightened, but she didn't interrupt. "And maybe I was," Grant continued. "At first. Maybe I didn't know how else to make it right." "That's not what I'm asking," she said, stepping closer. "You keep showing up, for me, for the boys, for this life. But I need to know something." He waited. "Are you doing this because you believe in it, or because you feel like you have to fix something that broke?" Grant looked at her, really looked. Her hair was pulled back. Her sweater had a faint smudge of finger paint. She looked tired and honest. So painfully honest it left no room for excuses. "I don't know," he admitted. Elena nodded. "Then find out. Because I don't need you to stand here if your heart is still somewhere else. I've learned to survive, but the boys, they're learning to hope again. And that's a different kind of fragile." He didn't respond right away, just reached for the back of a chair and gripped it. She softened. "You don't have to be the man your father wanted, or the man the company fears, but you have to be someone." Grant sat alone after she left, the silence swelling until it folded into clarity. By morning, his decision was made. He submitted his resignation from Greystone with no press release, no speech, just a line. "My time here has taught me how not to lead. I'm ready to begin again." Then he drove to the state licensing board and submitted documents to re-enter the teaching credentialing program. The form asked for a reason. He wrote, "Because no one learns to heal through silence." That evening, Elena received an email notification. Subject: class confirmation. She clicked it open. "Welcome to the new session of Storytelling for Resilience at Boston Community Hub. We believe stories shape survival. Your instructor, Grant Whitmore." She read it twice, then once more. The kettle whistled behind her, but she didn't move. The scent of fresh paint and warm cinnamon filled the courtyard of the Boston Arts Hub. Children were scattered across the lawn, their hands stained in bright acrylics, laughter carrying through the open windows. Along one brick wall, rows of colored paper fluttered gently, each square clipped with a clothespin, drawings of hope, memory, and things that could not be said out loud. A volunteer group of mothers had set up a bake table beside the old fountain, now cleaned and gurgling with life again. Elena stood near the entrance, clipboard in hand, her eyes moving constantly, yet soft with something she hadn't allowed herself in years, ease. Mason and Noah had taken the stage earlier than scheduled. Noah clutched a microphone too big for his hands, while Mason stood steady beside him. "There was a toy car," Noah began, "a little red one. It broke, and we thought it was gone forever." He paused, then added, "But someone didn't give up on it." Mason leaned closer. "That's kinda how we feel." The audience hushed, not with discomfort, but with reverence. A woman in the third row pressed a tissue to her cheek. Next to her, a former teacher from Dorchester Elementary nodded slowly. When the boys finished, their story hung in the air like a quiet hymn. The applause came late, and when it did, it wasn't loud. It was long. At the side of the stage, Elena glanced toward Grant. He'd stayed off to the right all morning, helping carry easels, kneeling to fix a loose panel on the ramp for wheelchair access. Not giving directions, just moving with the current of it all. Now, the MC was calling his name. "Grant Whitmore, would you join us?" He hesitated. Then he turned to Elena. "There's a line you once said," he murmured. "You didn't know when you started to trust me. You just found yourself there one day." She nodded, remembering. "Well, I don't know when I started loving you," he said, voice low and steady. "I just know that I do." Elena didn't answer with words. She didn't need to. Her hand found his, fingers interlacing without question. Together, they stepped into the light of the stage. What happened next wasn't dramatic. No lights dimmed, no speeches echoed, just a crowd rising not for a CEO, or a name that once stood for wealth, but for a man who had learned how to kneel beside a broken toy and wait until someone dared to trust again. The clapping came like a tide, steady and certain. Near the edge of the platform, Mason tugged Grant's sleeve. "Can we call you Dad now?" For real, his voice was small but sure. Grant blinked, breath catching. He crouched down, pulling both boys into his arms. "If you'll let me," he said, tears slipping freely now. "It'd be the greatest honor of my life." From the back, someone took a photo. In it, the man who once thought legacy meant buildings was kneeling in the sun, arms wrapped around two boys, and a woman who never asked him to be perfect, only real. Elena turned to say something, but stopped. Grant was already looking at her. She didn't look away. And for the first time, neither did he. The backyard of the Boston Arts Hub had never looked more alive. Spring had returned early that year, not just in the flowers, but in the way people walked slower, smiled longer. There were no rows of gold chairs, no towering cake, just benches made of reclaimed wood, jars of wildflowers, and sunlight falling through the branches overhead. Elena stood beneath the canopy of the old oak tree, her white dress moving gently in the breeze. It wasn't extravagant, just soft cotton and lace at the sleeves. Her hands held steady, not out of confidence, but out of peace. Grant stood across from her in a dark blue vest, the wooden buttons glinting in the afternoon light, Mason and Noah's first craft project, now worn over his heart. Noah adjusted his tie nervously. Mason, older by a few minutes and feeling it in full today, handed him the ring box with great ceremony. A ripple of soft laughter passed through the gathered friends as the boys walked forward, eyes wide, faces glowing. There was no priest, no officiant with a booming voice, just Mrs. Jensen standing between them, book in hand, reading softly. But it was Elena's voice that silenced the garden. "I don't need you to fix me," she said, eyes never leaving his. "I never did. I only needed someone who'd stay, who wouldn't run when it got heavy." Grant nodded, his voice barely a whisper. "I don't want to rewrite your story, Elena. I just want to be part of the pages that come next." They didn't speak of vows, they didn't need to, as they placed rings on each other's fingers. Mason leaned against Noah and whispered, "This is the good part." "Right." Noah nodded solemnly. "The best part." From the back row, a small statue caught the light. It had been carved by a local artist and placed quietly beneath the tree that morning. A toy car, simple and rough, held in the open palm of a larger wooden hand. Below it, a plaque read, "Family is not what we inherit, but what we build with what's broken." Later, inside the quiet room behind the library, Elena found a small box among the wedding gifts. It wasn't wrapped, just tied with an old ribbon she recognized from Grant's mother's journals. Inside was a letter, faded ink, folded edges. She opened it slowly. "My son, there are many kinds of love, some loud and triumphant, others quiet and hard-earned. The greatest kind doesn't ask for anything but presence. If you're reading this, you've chosen someone not to save, but to stand beside. That's all I ever wanted for you. There is a love greater than apology. Live in it." She read it once, then again. Grant found her there moments later. He didn't speak, just sat beside her. "I think she knew before we did," Elena said softly. He nodded. "I think she hoped we'd get here." Outside, the boys' laughter echoed against the walls, their footsteps chasing each other around the garden. Elena turned to him. "Do you ever wonder if we deserve all this?" she asked. He thought for a moment, then took her hand. "No," he said. "But maybe it's not about deserve. Maybe it's about saying yes, even when it scares you." She leaned against him, eyes half closed. They didn't say more. They didn't need to, because some things aren't spoken in vows or carved in wood. Some things are held in a look, a quiet breath, a promise made not for show, but for the days no one else sees. She didn't let go of his hand, and he didn't ask her to. The small wooden car still sat by the windowsill, its paint chipped, wheels uneven. No one touched it now, not because it was forgotten, but because it had come to mean something else. Sometimes, it's not the grand gestures that hold us together, but the quiet decision to stay when no one's asking. And in that stillness, something old made room for something new, not perfect, but honest. And maybe that's enough.